I stopped by my aunt's house unexpectedly. Paled, she answered the door and hushed, "Get in. Stay hidden." The screen door screeched loud enough to curdle air. Cold November wind bit through my flannel shirt, sharp and damp with the rot of fallen maple leaves lining the ditch. Aunt Marnie stood in the doorway, her hands braced on the frame, her face drained of every drop of color. Her lips trembled. She spoke 4 quiet words. "Get in. Stay hidden." I froze on her porch step, boots all scraping rough weathered wood. I had driven 40 minutes out of my way to drop off her favorite pecan pie, baked that morning for her 62nd birthday. No text ahead, no phone call. Just a simple, kind surprise for the woman who'd raised me half my life. Nothing about this was kind or simple. Her eyes darted past my shoulder, scanning the empty rural road like a predator hunted her down. Her graying brown hair fell loose and unbrushed, a rare mess for a woman who ironed her dish towels every Sunday. The scent of burnt coffee clung thick to the porch air, bitter and wrong. I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong. A low, slow car engine rumbled in the distance. Marnie's entire body flinched. She grabbed my wrist with cold, shaking fingers and hauled me inside the house so fast the pie tin slid in my grip. The screen door slammed shut behind us with a hollow bang that echoed through the quiet living room. She locked the deadbolt twice, twisting the key until it clicked hard enough to hear the mechanism strain. Then she spun to me, pressing a single finger tight against her pursed lips, and every ordinary, warm memory I held of this house shattered clean in my chest. 3 years earlier, this porch had been my safe place. I'd sat here every weekend after my parents' fatal car crash, 19 years old and raw with grief, while Aunt Marnie baked pie and hummed old gospel hymns under her breath. The floorboards had creaked the same way then, the maple trees had bled the same burnt orange autumn color, the wind had carried the same damp country chill. Back then, this house had felt like refuge. It had felt like family. Now it felt like a trap. I set the pecan pie down on the scuffed wooden coffee table, my movements slow and careful. The ceramic tin rattled softly against the grain, the only sound in the silent room besides our shallow breathing. Sunlight filtered thin through dusty window panes, streaking pale gold across the faded floral couch where I'd cried 100 nights. Marnie still hadn't spoken. She stood with her back pressed flat to the front door, her shoulders rigid, her gaze fixed on the road beyond the glass. She did not blink. Did not move. I studied her, searching for the familiar aunt I knew. The woman who fussed over my grades, who patched my old flannel sleeves, who always said grace before every meal no matter how busy she was. This version of her was a stranger. Her jaw was tight, her usual soft smile erased entirely. A faint tremor ran through her shoulders, the kind you could not hide, even when you spent decades pretending everything was fine. "Aunt Marnie," I whispered, keeping my voice low, matching her silent urgency. "What is going on?" She finally blinked. Her gaze snapped to mine, and the fear in her eyes was so vivid it made my throat tighten. She hesitated 2 full seconds before answering, a tiny tell I'd noticed my whole life, the pause she always used when she was weighing whether to tell a hard truth. "Jesse's home," she said. The name landed heavy in my stomach, cold and solid as a stone dropped in a well. Jesse Carter. Marnie's only son. My older cousin. The boy I'd grown up idolizing, the kid who'd taught me to fish in the creek behind this house, who'd fixed my broken bike when I was 12, who'd left this small Ohio town 8 years prior and never looked back. He'd vanished the summer after he turned 22. No goodbye. No text. No call. Just an empty bedroom, a half-packed duffel, and a single note scrawled on a fast food napkin, "I'll be back when I fix it." No one knew what he'd meant. No one knew where he'd gone. For 8 years, the town had whispered. For 8 years, Marnie had waited. I'd assumed he was dead. Or running from some stupid youthful mistake he'd never owned up to. He's been here 3 days, Marnie said, her voice barely audible over the wind whistling around the window frames. He won't leave. He won't explain. He just stays quiet. Watches the road. My brow furrowed. I thought of Jessie, I remembered. Loud, reckless, quick to laugh, always chasing the next adventure. Quiet and watchful did not fit him. Why would he hide here? I asked. This is the first place anyone would look for him. Marnie's fingers lifted to her collar, smoothing the frayed edge of her flannel shirt in a sharp, repetitive motion. It was her nervous tell, the same one she'd had since I was a kid, the motion she used when she was lying by omission. Not if no one knows he's here, she said. The car engine grew louder outside. This time, Marnie did not flinch. She went perfectly still, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes locked on the front window. I could see the vehicle cresting the distant hill, a dark sedan, slow and deliberate, not a local truck or farm vehicle. It cruised down the empty country road, rolling past the overgrown ditches and weathered mailbox posts, heading straight for her driveway. My pulse spiked sharp and fast. I stood straighter, my hands falling loose at my sides, every muscle tensing for a threat I could not name. Go, Marnie breathed, urgency sharp in her tone. Down the basement stairs. The old root cellar behind the water heater. Pull the plywood panel shut. Do not make a sound. Do not move. Do not come out until I call your name 3 times clear. I stared at her, stunned. I'm not hiding from someone in your own house, Aunt Marnie. Tell me who's in that car. Please, Lila. Her voice cracked on the single word, breaking the steady calm she'd forced into place. Don't argue with me. Not right now. For once in your life, just obey. The car tires crunched onto her gravel driveway. I did not hesitate again. I turned on my heel and bolted for the narrow basement door tucked beside the kitchen pantry. The floor creaked under my sneakers, the familiar squeak of the third board from the wall, a sound I'd known since childhood. I gripped the cold metal doorknob, twisted it fast, and slipped into the dim stairwell. Basement air hit me instantly, damp and earthy, thick with the smell of mildew and old cardboard boxes and canned tomatoes Marnie preserved every fall. The single bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs cast thin yellow light over concrete floors and stacked wooden shelves. I descended fast, quiet, my steps light on the worn wooden treads. At the bottom, I turned toward the back wall, toward the bulky gray water heater that had stood in this spot for as long as I could remember. Behind it, tucked into the foundation, was a narrow hidden nook, covered by a rough plywood panel Marnie had built when Jessie and I were kids to hide our birthday presents and stolen candy. I'd not thought about this spot in years. I squeezed behind the water heater, my shoulders brushing the cold metal tank, and pulled the plywood panel closed until it clicked shut. The world narrowed down to dark, cramped stillness. Air grew thinner, cooler, smelling of dust and rust. I pressed my back flat against the concrete foundation, my heart hammering in my ears. Through the thin basement walls, I heard the front door of the house open. Heels on wood. Slow, deliberate steps. Not Marnie's soft house slippers. Hard leather soles. A stranger. A man's voice, low and calm, too calm for a stranger showing up unannounced on a rural November afternoon. Afternoon, Ms. Hale. Marnie's reply was steady, practiced, the voice of a woman who'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times in 3 days. Officer Tate. What brings you out this far from town? Just routine welfare check. The man's footsteps shifted, moving deeper into the living room. Got an anonymous tip. Said a fugitive's been hiding out at this address. My blood turned cold. Fugitive. The word hung in the quiet house, sharp and final, echoing through the wall and settling heavy in my bones. I pressed a hand tight over my mouth to muffle my breathing, my fingers trembling against my skin. I thought of Jessie. The boy who'd taught me to skip stones in the creek. The boy who'd carried my backpack home when I twisted my ankle. The boy who'd left home with a dream and come back a fugitive. Routine welfare check. Anonymous tip. Fugitive. None of it made sense. I heard Marnie's quiet, bitter laugh. A fugitive? Out here? Officer, you know this road's barely got 3 houses on it. I haven't had company in weeks besides my niece stopping by today. Your niece? Officer Tate's voice sharpened, just a fraction. She here now? My muscles locked tight. Just left, Marnie said without hesitation. Dropped off a pie for my birthday. Headed back to town 10 minutes ago. Lies. Smooth, clean, unflinching lies. The kind Marnie never told. Not ever. She'd always been the woman who believed honesty was the only salvation, who said God saw every false word. Whatever Jessie was running from, it had forced her to abandon every rule she'd ever lived by. I heard the faint creak of the couch as the officer shifted his weight. The floorboard squeaked exactly where I'd sat countless evenings, the worn spot from years of use. Mind if I take a look around? Tate asked. Standard procedure, ma'am. Nothing personal. I mind very much, Marnie replied, her tone firm now, rooted in quiet defiance. This is private property. I've lived here 30 years without trouble. I don't intend to start now over some anonymous rumor. Anonymous rumors turn out true more often than folks think. Tate's footsteps moved toward the hallway. I'll just check the bedrooms and the basement. Be quick. Won't disturb your afternoon long. Panic flared hot in my chest. He was coming down here. I squeezed tighter into the cramped nook, my shoulder pressing hard against the plywood panel, my eyes fixed on the narrow crack of dim light seeping through the edge. I could hear every step he took toward the basement door, slow and unrushed. Marnie did not stop him. She did not argue again. She just stood silent, and in that silence I understood something terrible. She wasn't hiding Jessie from the police. She was hiding me from them too. The basement door creaked open. Cooler air rushed down the stairs, carrying the faint scent of pine air freshener and police issue leather. The bare bulb at the top of the stairs flickered once, casting jagged shadows down the concrete walls. Tate's footsteps started down. I held my breath. Each step thudded heavy, echoing through the empty basement. My pulse roared in my ears so loud I could barely hear anything else. I counted his movements, one by one, tracking his progress toward the back of the room. He paused halfway down the stairs. Lights awful dim down here, he muttered. Marnie's voice came from the top of the steps, calm and unyielding. Bulb's been flickering for months. Haven't gotten around to replacing it. Basement's just storage anyway. Nothing but old boxes and canned goods. Storage can hide a lot. Tate kept walking. I watched his shadow stretch across the concrete floor, creeping closer to the water heater, closer to my hidden nook. My fingers dug hard into my palm, nails pressing half-moon indents into my skin, the sharp pain the only thing keeping me grounded. I could see the outline of his uniform, the dark navy fabric, the glint of a badge on his chest. I could hear the faint jingle of his utility belt, keys, and cuffs clicking soft with every movement. He stopped directly in front of the water heater. My entire body went rigid. He tilted his head, scanning the back wall, his gaze brushing the plywood panel covering my hiding spot. For a long, endless second, nothing moved. No sound. No breath. No movement at all. I thought he'd seen it. I thought he'd reach out and yank the panel free and find me pressed into the dark, terrified and hidden in my aunt's basement for a crime I knew nothing about. Then he grunted softly. Looks clear, he said. He turned and walked back toward the stairs. His footsteps thudded away, growing fainter with every step. The basement door creaked shut again, sealing off the faint light from upstairs. I stayed perfectly still for 3 full minutes after the door closed. I did not breathe deep. I did not move a muscle. I waited until I heard the front door open and close, until the crunch of gravel tires signaled the officer's car pulling away down the road. Only then did I exhale, a shaky, ragged breath that burned my chest raw. I waited another minute longer, just to be safe, before pushing the plywood panel open and slipping out of the nook. My legs ached from being cramped tight, my shoulders stiff and sore, my skin dusted with fine gray basement dirt. I walked slowly up the basement stairs, my steps quiet and cautious. When I stepped into the kitchen, Marnie was standing at the sink, her hands braced on the counter, her head bowed. Her shoulders shook with silent, suppressed sobs. She was biting her lower lip so hard I could see the indent of her teeth, fighting to hold her tears in place. I walked across the linoleum floor, the familiar cold tile seeping through my sneaker soles, and stopped beside her. "Aunt Marnie," I said softly. "Tell me everything. Right now." She lifted her head. Her eyes were glistening, red-rimmed, but she did not cry. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, a sharp, brisk motion, and turned to face me. Her resolve was back in place, hard and unbreakable. "Jesse didn't run from trouble 8 years ago," she said. "He ran from proof." I frowned. "Proof of what?" Before she could answer, a quiet voice spoke from the dark hallway behind us. Low, rough, and familiar, a voice I'd not heard in 8 long years. "Proof that 3 men in this town got away with murder." I spun around fast. Jesse Carter stood in the hallway shadow, leaner than I remembered, his dark hair cut short, a faint scar slicing through his left eyebrow. His hands were empty, his posture tense, his eyes locked straight on mine. And in that moment, I realized the hidden nook hadn't been built for me. It had been built for him. And I'd just become an accidental witness to a secret this small town had killed to keep buried. Jesse stepped forward slowly, moving out of the hallway shadow and into the thin November sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. The scar on his eyebrow caught the light, pale and sharp against his tanned skin. He looked older, worn down, the easy boyish charm stripped clean away. 8 years on the run had carved lines into his face, deep grooves around his eyes and mouth that hadn't existed when we were kids. "You've grown up," he said quietly. The words were simple, harmless, but they landed heavy. I'd been 22 when he left. I was 30 now. 8 years was long enough to change everything. "You're still here," I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling in my chest. "I thought you'd be gone for good." He huffed a bitter, quiet laugh. I tried. "Turns out some secrets don't let you leave." Marnie turned from the sink, drying her shaking hands on a faded dish towel, her gaze flickering between us. She looked exhausted, worn thin by 3 days of hiding, of lying, of waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the wooden kitchen table. "Both of you. We need to talk. No more secrets. Not from Lila." We pulled out chairs and sat. The old wooden legs scraped soft against the linoleum, the only sound in the quiet kitchen besides our breathing. The pecan pie sat untouched on the counter, forgotten, the reason I'd showed up unannounced now trivial and small. Jesse folded his hands on the tabletop. His fingers were calloused, scarred, hands that had worked hard and fought harder. He stared at his knuckles for a long moment before speaking. 8 years ago, I worked night shift at the county maintenance shop, he began. Fixed road signs, patched potholes, repaired county fencing. Nothing glamorous. Just quiet, blue-collar work. I nodded. I remembered that job. He'd been proud of it, proud to earn steady money, proud to build a life in the town we'd grown up in. 3 men ran the shop back then, he continued. Sheriff Hale's nephew, a county commissioner's son, and a local businessman named Grady Voss. All well-liked. All untouchable in this town. My brow lifted. I knew those names. Everyone in this county did. They were the faces of local power, the men who controlled jobs, permits, town favors. Men who never faced consequences for anything. One night, I stayed late to finish a fence repair invoice, Jesse said. I heard noise in the back storage bay. I thought it was just another worker finishing up. It wasn't. He paused, swallowing hard, his jaw tightening. The memory alone visibly pained him. They were moving crates, he said. Hundreds of them. Labeled farm equipment parts. Inside? Stolen prescription pills. Fentanyl, oxycodone, all diverted from county medical supply shipments. They'd been running a smuggling ring out of the county shop for over a year. My stomach dropped. Small-town Ohio did not have big city crime. We had petty theft, minor DUIs, occasional domestic disputes. We did not have county-run drug smuggling operations. I saw them, Jesse said. They saw me. I froze. I was 22, stupid, terrified. I didn't know what to do. Marnie's hand drifted across the table, settling gently over his clenched fist. Her touch was soft, comforting, the only warmth in the cold story he told. They threatened me, Jesse went on. Said if I breathed a word to anyone, they'd ruin my life. Ruin Mom's life. Run us out of town, jail me on false charges, make sure we never had peace again. I leaned forward slightly, my curiosity sharp and urgent. So you kept quiet? I tried. He shook his head, regret thick in his voice. For 2 weeks. I went to work every day, smiled at them, pretended I saw nothing. But I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept thinking about the pills hitting the streets, about the kids in this town who'd get hurt. I understood that guilt. Small towns relied on silence to survive. Bad things festered when good people looked away. I wrote down everything, Jesse said. Times, dates, crate numbers, license plates on their delivery trucks. I compiled a folder full of proof. I planned to take it to the state police, out of county, where local power couldn't touch it. Hope flared brief in my chest. You turned them in? I tried. His voice dropped lower, darker. The night before I planned to drive to the state post, a young deputy caught wind of what I had. He confronted me at my trailer. Told me to hand over the folder or disappear. I frowned. A deputy? Who? Tate. Jesse's eyes lifted to mine, hard and cold. Officer Colton Tate. The man who just searched this house. Recognition crashed over me. The calm, polite officer who'd stood in Marnie's living room minutes earlier was the man who'd forced my cousin into hiding 8 years ago. He was young then, Jesse said. New to the force. Hungry for advancement. He was working for them. Protecting the ring. My skin crawled. The man who'd stood in this house, who'd spoken politely to my aunt, who'd searched for a fugitive, was part of the corruption he'd been hiding from. I refused to hand over the proof, Jesse continued. I told him I was going public no matter the cost. He got angry. Said I'd signed my own death warrant. He paused, his gaze drifting to the kitchen window, staring out at the empty country road like he could see the ghosts of that night. Later that same night, he said, a local man named Eli Brewer died in a supposed hunting accident. Shot through the chest while walking his property late at night. Ruled self-inflicted. Closed case. I blinked in shock. I remembered Eli Brewer. A quiet older man, a retired veteran, a regular at the town diner. I'd attended his funeral when I was 14. The town had grieved him, called it a terrible tragedy. It wasn't an accident, Jesse said flatly. Eli found their smuggling operation too. He confronted them. They killed him to keep him quiet. And they left his body on his land to make it look like a suicide. The kitchen felt colder, the air thicker, heavier with the weight of unspoken murder. All those years of town gossip, all those quiet condolences, all based on a lie. They came for me next, Jesse said. Tate and the 3 men. They broke into my trailer that night. I barely escaped out the back window. I ran with nothing but the folder of proof and the clothes on my back. I stared at him, stunned. You've been running ever since? 8 years, he nodded. I bounced from state to state, odd jobs, cheap motels, always looking over my shoulder. They put a warrant out for my arrest. Burglary, tampering with county property, falsifying official records. All fake. All to paint me as the criminal so no one would believe me. The pieces clicked together one by one. The anonymous tip. The welfare check. Tate's sudden appearance at the house. They'd known Jesse was back. They'd been watching. Why come back now? I asked quietly. After 8 years safe? Jesse's jaw tightened. He hesitated 2 full seconds, that same tell Marnie had, before answering. Eli's granddaughter turned 18 last month, he said. She filed a petition to reopen her grandfather's case. She's asking for new evidence, for a full investigation. The men who killed him panicked. They started covering their tracks. My breath caught. They're tying up loose ends, Jesse said. Anyone who knows the truth. Anyone who could testify. Me first. Then anyone who shelters me. Anyone who helps me. I froze. Anyone who shelters me. I'd hidden in this house. I'd spoken to him. I knew the truth now. I was a loose end too. Marnie reached across the table, gripping my hand tight in hers, her fingers warm despite her cold palms. That's why I made you hide, baby. That's why I lied to Tate. They don't just want Jesse gone. They want anyone who knows this story silenced. The weight of it settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I'd driven out here for a birthday pie surprise. I'd walked straight into an 8-year cover-up, straight into a small-town murder conspiracy, straight into danger no one had warned me existed. I thought of Tate's calm, polite face. His easy tone. His routine welfare check. He'd known Jesse was here. He'd suspected someone else was hiding with him. He'd left only because he hadn't found proof. He would come back. So what now? I asked, my voice steady despite the fear coiling tight in my gut. We run? We go to the state police? We take your evidence public? Jesse shook his head slowly. The evidence I had 8 years ago is gone. I lost it the night I ran. I've spent 8 years trying to rebuild it. Tracking shipments, tracing payments, connecting the dots. I have enough now to reopen the case. But I need help. He looked straight at me, his gaze steady and serious. I need someone local. Someone they don't suspect. Someone who can move through this town invisible and gather the final proof. I stared at him, realization dawning slow and sharp. He hadn't come home just to clear his name. He'd come home to finish the fight he'd started 8 years ago. And he wanted me to fight it with him. Outside, a lone bird chirped in the maple tree. The wind rustled the fallen leaves along the ditch. The world looked ordinary, peaceful, harmless. Nothing about it was ordinary anymore. Every quiet country road, every friendly local officer, every small-town smile now hid a layer of darkness I'd never seen. A murder. A cover-up. A smuggling ring. 8 years of lies. I thought of Eli Brewer, dead and forgotten, his death ruled a mistake while his killers walked free. I thought of Jesse, running scared for half his life, branded a criminal for telling the truth. I thought of Marnie, lying for her son, living in fear for 3 days, breaking every moral she'd ever held to protect family. I thought of justice. The quiet, small-town justice no one bothered to fight for anymore. I squeezed Marnie's hand tight, then lifted my gaze to meet Jesse's. Tell me what to do, I said. Jesse exhaled a slow, relieved breath. For the first time since I'd walked through that door, a flicker of the old boyish hope returned to his eyes. But before he could speak, a phone buzzed sharp and loud on the kitchen counter. Marnie's phone. We all froze. The screen lit up with a name that turned every drop of warmth in the room to ice. Colton Tate. He was calling back. And we all knew exactly why. I stared at the glowing phone screen, my pulse thundering in my ears. The name burned bright, unblinking, impossible to ignore. Colton Tate. The officer who'd left 10 minutes prior, the man embedded in the town's corruption, the man hunting my cousin. No one moved. No one breathed. The phone buzzed again, the sharp electronic tone cutting through the heavy kitchen silence. Marnie's fingers tightened on the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening. She knew what this call meant. We all did. He hadn't believed her lie. He'd left to run a quick check, to confirm I'd never driven back to town, to verify his growing suspicion. Now he was calling to confront us, to demand the truth, to lock down the loose ends before nightfall. Answer it, Jesse said quietly. Marnie's head snapped toward him. Are you crazy? He'll hear something in my voice. He'll know we're lying. Exactly. Jesse leaned forward, his tone sharp and calculating now, the tone of someone who'd spent 8 years outthinking hunters. Let him hear the stress. Let him think we're scared of a routine call. Let him underestimate us. I understood his plan instantly. Fear was expected. Guilt was expected. A grieving, worried mother hiding her fugitive son would sound terrified on the phone. Calm composure would arouse suspicion. Trembling panic would confirm his assumptions. Marnie hesitated one last second, then reached for the phone. She swiped to answer, pressing it to her ear, and let her voice shake naturally, letting the fear she already felt bleed into every syllable. Hello, Officer Tate, she said. Ms. Hale. His voice was calm, measured, the same polite drawl as before. No suspicion yet. Just routine. Sorry to bother you again so soon. Quick follow-up on that welfare check. Of course, Marnie replied, her breath shallow, unsteady. What do you need? Your niece, Lila, Tate said. I ran a quick plate check on her vehicle. Her car's still parked on your roadside turnout. Didn't drive back to town like you said. My blood ran cold. He checked my car. The small gravel pull off 100 yards down the road, where I'd parked to carry the pie up the porch steps. I'd forgotten entirely. A tiny, careless mistake. One that had just unraveled Marnie's entire lie. Marnie's jaw tightened. She did not panic. She did not rush to correct herself. She simply adjusted the story, smooth and quick. She walked back to town, she said. Said she needed the exercise. Left her car parked down there on purpose. Didn't want to clog my driveway. A beat of silence on the line. I could picture Tate sitting in his patrol car, staring at his dashboard screen, weighing her words, searching for the crack in her story. Walked 6 miles back to town in November wind? Tate asked, his tone sharpening slightly. That's a long walk for a casual pie drop visit. She's always loved walking country roads, Marnie said, steady now. Always has. Since she was a kid. You'd know that if you paid attention to local folks, officer. The subtle rebuke landed soft but firm. Local knowledge was armor in small towns. Outsiders could not easily argue with lifelong habit. Tate huffed quiet breath over the line. Fair enough. Apologies for prying. Just following protocol. Protocol sure digs deep into ordinary people's lives these days, Marnie replied. Just keeping the county safe. His tone shifted, casual, almost conversational. Heard your birthday's today. 62nd. Small celebration? Marnie's fingers tightened around the phone. Quiet one. Always preferred it that way. Figured. Tate paused. I'll drive past your road one more time tonight. Just to make sure no strangers linger. Town's on edge lately. Can't be too careful. The threat was subtle, buried beneath polite small-town courtesy. I'll be watching you. All night long. No more hiding. Marnie's voice did not waver. I appreciate the concern, officer. Have a rest of your day. She ended the call and set the phone down slow on the counter. The second the screen went dark, the pretense shattered. Her shoulders slumped forward, and she breathed out a ragged, exhausted breath. He's circling, she said. He doesn't have proof, but he knows we're hiding something. He'll patrol this road all night. He'll watch every car, every walker, every light in this house. Jesse nodded, his expression grim. He's buying time. Waiting for backup. Waiting for the warrant to process. Warrant? I asked. Search warrant, Jessie confirmed. Anonymous tips enough for probable cause in this county. They'll have it by sundown. Once they have that, they'll tear this house apart. Basement, attic, walls, floors. They'll find any trace I've been here. Panic flared sharp in my chest. Then we leave now. Before sundown. We can't. Jessie shook his head. Roads are monitored. Patrol cars running constant passes. Checkpoints on the county line. They're locking the whole area down. I stared at him, stunned. We're trapped here? For now. He leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the window, calculating every angle. Trapped, but not helpless. We have time. A few hours at most. I thought of the hours ticking away, of the sun sinking lower in the November sky, of the warrant being typed and filed and approved in some county office downtown. Every passing minute shrank our window. What proof do we still need? I asked, cutting straight to the point. What can I get that you can't? Jessie's gaze locked on mine, clear and focused. Financial records. Grady Voss's business ledgers. He's the ringleader. He handles all the payments, all the out-of-state transfers, all the supply manifests. Voss? I repeated the name. Grady Voss owned the town's largest hardware store, sponsored the local Little League team, taught Sunday school at the community church. He was the town's most beloved citizen. Untouchable. Revered. No one would believe the gentle, generous community leader ran a deadly drug smuggling ring and ordered a man's murder. His office is above the hardware store downtown, Jessie said. Locked every night at 6. Security systems old, outdated. I've studied it for months. I frowned. You want me to break into his office? Not break in. He shook his head. You walk in. You're a local girl. You're harmless. You've never been on their radar. You go during business hours, ask to file a community volunteer form, linger after closing, slip into the back office while the staff locks up. It was risky. Reckless. But it was smart. Perfectly calculated. They watched for strangers, for fugitives, for suspicious vehicles. They did not watch ordinary local girls running ordinary errands. I can do that, I said without hesitation. Marnie cut in fast, worried. Lila, it's too dangerous. If they catch you snooping. They won't catch me. I turned to her, firm and steady. I'm invisible here. Always have been. I work at the town library. I volunteer at the food bank. I'm just the quiet girl who comes home on weekends. No one suspects me of anything. It was true. I'd lived a quiet, unassuming life in this town. I'd never caused trouble. Never questioned authority. Never rocked the small-town boat. That invisibility was now our greatest weapon. Jessie nodded, satisfied. The ledgers are in a locked filing cabinet in the back left corner of his office. The combination is his wife's birthday. October 12, 1978. I saw him input it once, years ago. I memorized the numbers instantly, locking them tight in my mind. October 12, 1978. You take photos of every ledger page, Jessie said. Every transfer, every shipment, every coded entry. You don't take physical files. You don't leave traces. You lock the cabinet exactly how you found it. You leave like you were never there. I nodded. Got it. Once you have the photos, he continued, you send them to a state police tip line, anonymous encrypted email. No return address. No traceable device. I can do that too. The plan was solid. Tight. Low risk, high reward. The only variable was time. I leave in 1 hour, I said. Enough time for afternoon traffic, enough time for staff to start closing up shop. Marnie reached across the table, gripping my hand again, her eyes glistening with unspoken fear. Be careful. Please. These men don't hesitate to protect themselves. They've already killed once. I squeezed her hand. I'll be careful. I promise. Jesse leaned forward one last time, his voice dropping to a quiet, serious warning. And Lila? Trust no one. Not the sheriff. Not the deputies. Not the church folks. Not the neighbors. Everyone in this town is either complicit, scared silent, or bought off. I thought of Officer Tate's polite smile. Of Grady Voss's Sunday school kindness. Of the quiet town gossip that never touched the powerful families. I believed him. In this small, quiet, peaceful Ohio town, innocence was just another word for ignorance. And ignorance had kept killers free for 8 long years. I stood up from the table, pushing my chair back soft against the floor. I brushed the basement dust off my flannel shirt, smoothed my hair, and prepared to walk back into the ordinary world. 1 hour. 1 chance. 1 shot at justice for Eli Brewer, for Jesse, for every person this town had failed. And somewhere out on the country road, Officer Colton Tate circled slow, watching and waiting, completely unaware that the quiet niece he'd dismissed was about to unravel everything he'd spent 8 years protecting. The sun dipped lower outside, painting the maple trees in burnt orange and deep red. The afternoon was fading fast. I slipped back into my sedan parked 100 yards down the gravel shoulder, brushing dry maple leaves off the hood before sliding behind the wheel. The vinyl seat held the faint stale warmth of afternoon sunlight, and my fingers brushed the cold metal of my phone tucked into the front pocket of my flannel shirt. I'd wiped every trace of basement dust from my cuffs and jeans before leaving Marnie's house, careful to carry nothing that might link me back to the hidden secret inside those 4 weathered walls. The drive toward town unfolded along winding 2-lane roads lined with dormant cornfields and weathered wooden farm fences. Each passing mailbox, each clapboard farmhouse set back from the pavement, felt like a silent witness to the lies woven deep into this county's soil. Country radio hummed soft old gospel tunes through my car speakers, the slow melody clashing sharply with the thrumming nervous energy coiled tight in my chest. I found myself tapping my thumb repeatedly against the steering wheel, an anxious habit I'd picked up as a teen whenever I waited for test results or dreaded a difficult conversation. Grady Voss's hardware store sat on the main downtown square, sandwiched between the town diner and the brick library where I'd worked part-time every summer since I turned 16. Hand-painted wooden signage hung above the front glass windows, faded red lettering advertising lumber, gardening supplies, and seasonal holiday decor. I circled the block once, easing my car into a parallel parking spot across the street, and studied the storefront through my windshield. A handful of regular customers lingered near the checkout counter, laughing as they browsed racks of hand tools and winter snow shovels. No sign of heightened security, no uniformed deputies loitering at the doors, no obvious watchful eyes scanning every stranger who crossed the sidewalk. I tucked my phone into the inner pocket of my jacket, ensuring the camera app was ready to open with 1 quick tap, then stepped out onto the concrete sidewalk. The crisp November wind nipped at my cheeks, carrying the sharp earthy scent of wet mulch from the flower planters lining the town square. I adjusted my posture, softening my tense shoulders into the casual slouch of a familiar local girl running a mundane errand, and pushed open the glass front door of Voss Hardware. The warm interior air washed over me, thick with the sharp tang of pine lumber, machine oil, and cinnamon potpourri simmering on the customer service counter. A teenage part-timer with a faded baseball cap glanced up from stacking screwdrivers near the checkout, offering a quick, distracted smile before returning to his task. I wandered slowly past rows of paint cans and outdoor light fixtures, my gaze drifting toward the narrow wooden staircase tucked at the far rear of the sales floor, the only access point to Grady's private upstairs office. Grady Voss himself emerged from the stockroom as I paused beside a display of volunteer park cleanup flyers pinned to a corkboard. He wore a well-pressed navy flannel button-down and khaki trousers, his silver-gray hair neatly combed back from his forehead, a gentle practiced smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. His fingers brushed lightly against the cuff of his shirt as he stepped closer, that small unconscious tell Jesse had described, the nervous smoothing motion men often used when hiding uneasy truths beneath polite charm. "Lila Hale, isn't it?" His voice was warm and graveled, the slow drawl of a lifelong Ohio native, and he extended one calloused hand to shake mine. "Haven't seen you in town since you came home to help your aunt celebrate her 62nd birthday. How's Marnie holding up today?" I returned his handshake gently, my smile easy and unforced, masking the tight knot of tension winding through my ribs. "She's doing all right, sir. Just enjoying a quiet day at home. I stopped by to drop off a pecan pie for her this morning, then headed into town to grab a volunteer registration form for the county Christmas park cleanup. I figured your office would have the official paperwork filed away upstairs." Grady's smile widened, and he nodded approvingly. "Always admired how you step up to look after this community, young lady. Too few folks these days care to roll up their sleeves and give back to the town that raised them." The volunteer forms are locked in my back office filing cabinet. "I'll walk you up the stairs myself once I finish ringing up these last few customers closing out their orders." I thanked him quietly and wandered toward the front window, pretending to admire the festive evergreen wreaths hanging from the store's exterior trim. Each time the bell above the entrance jingled to signal another departing customer, my pulse ticked faster, counting down the precious minutes until the shop would lock its doors for the evening. The teenage clerk began flipping the open/closed sign toward the window, stacking empty cardboard shipping boxes near the back door, and Grady gestured for me to follow him toward the wooden staircase. The narrow stairwell creaked under our footsteps, the worn wooden treads groaning with a familiar pitch I recognized from childhood trips to pick up fundraiser flyers for the local church youth group. Sunlight filtered through a single small attic window at the top of the landing, casting thin streaks of gold across the faded beige carpet lining the hallway leading to Grady's private office. He twisted a brass key in the lock and pushed the oak door open, stepping aside to let me cross the threshold first. The office space was neat and meticulously organized, a large mahogany desk positioned beneath the window overlooking the town square, rows of labeled file folders stacked neatly on metal shelving units lining every wall. A framed photograph hung above his desk, capturing Grady and his wife standing beside their grown children at a church barbecue, warm smiles frozen on their faces. The locked filing cabinet Jessie had described sat in the far left corner of the room, its dark metal surface polished free of dust, a small combination dial embedded into the front panel. "Take all the time you need to fill out your volunteer paperwork," Grady said, smoothing the cuff of his flannel shirt once more before stepping back toward the hallway doorway. "I'll be downstairs locking the registers and securing the back stockroom doors. Just make certain you latch the office deadbolt firmly behind you when you're ready to leave for the evening. We've had a few minor break-ins along the square over the past couple of months, can't be too careful these days." I nodded and offered him a quiet word of thanks, waiting until his footsteps faded down the creaking stairwell before turning to face the locked filing cabinet. My fingers hovered over the combination dial for a heartbeat, recalling the numbers Jessie had whispered back at Marnie's kitchen table, October 12, 1978. I twisted the dial slowly, entering each digit one at a time, and heard a soft satisfying click echo through the quiet office as the cabinet latch released. The upper drawer slid open smoothly to reveal stacks of bound ledger books, each cover embossed with the fiscal year and stamped with Voss Hardware's official company logo. I pulled my smartphone from my jacket pocket, activating the camera and holding the device steady above the lined pages filled with handwritten transaction records, coded shipment references, and long columns of out-of-state wire transfer amounts. I photographed every page methodically, moving from one ledger to the next without rushing, careful to leave each volume positioned exactly as I'd found it to erase any trace of my intrusion. Halfway through the third bound ledger, a faint snippet of conversation drifted up from the sales floor below, carried through the thin floorboards separating the office from the main shop space. I paused, holding my breath, pressing one ear against the cool wood of the office door to catch the words drifting upward. "Took you long enough to wrap up the evening paperwork, Grady. Tate radioed in 10 minutes ago to confirm our anonymous tip landed on the sheriff's desk. The search warrant for Marnie Hale's rural property will be signed and delivered before sundown." The voice was sharp and unfamiliar, edged with quiet triumph. "Once we haul her fugitive nephew into custody and pin every smuggling charge on his record, we can put this 8-year mess permanently behind us." Grady's reply drifted upward, lower and more cautious. We cannot afford any loose ends. That niece of Marnie's showed up unannounced this morning, and Tate swears her vehicle remains parked along the roadside turnout. If that girl witnessed anything inside the Hale residence, we need to make certain she never gets the chance to share what she saw with outside authorities. A cold prickle of dread crawled up the back of my neck, and I slipped my phone back into my pocket, sliding the ledger closed and twisting the combination dial to relock the filing cabinet. I tiptoed across the carpeted office floor toward the hallway, pressing my eye against the narrow crack between the door and its frame to peer down the stairwell. Grady stood at the bottom landing, leaning in close to a man wearing a plain dark windbreaker, his face partially obscured by the brim of a baseball cap. I recognized the broad set of his shoulders instantly, Deputy Colton Tate. They stood locked in tense whispered conversation, their heads tilted toward one another, oblivious to the pair of eyes watching them from the top of the creaking wooden stairs. I eased back from the doorway, my mind racing to map out an escape route if their discussion turned toward securing the upstairs office space. The small attic window overlooked the narrow alleyway running behind the row of downtown storefronts, a potential emergency exit if the front stairwell became blocked. I waited several long minutes until I heard the jingle of the hardware store's front entrance bell, signaling Tate's departure from the premises, then stepped cautiously back into the hallway. Grady's footsteps moved toward the back stockroom, leaving the main stairwell temporarily unguarded. I grabbed the stack of volunteer registration flyers resting on the edge of his desk, latched the office deadbolt securely behind me, and descended the stairs at a casual unhurried pace. Grady glanced up from counting cash inside the front register as I reached the sales floor, offering me one final practiced smile. "Got all the paperwork you needed sorted out?" "Everything I required, thank you again for your kindness," I replied, clutching the flyers loosely in one hand. "I'll drop my completed registration form off first thing tomorrow morning before my library shift begins." He waved off my gratitude and returned to his task of locking the cash drawer, never once suspecting the damning photographic evidence tucked safely inside my jacket pocket. I pushed through the glass front door and stepped back onto the sidewalk, the evening sun dipping low behind the brick courthouse at the end of the town square, painting the sky in streaks of burnt amber and soft violet. I climbed back into my sedan and pulled away from the parallel parking spot, driving slowly out of the downtown district until the last line of storefronts faded behind me. I navigated toward a remote rest area tucked alongside the county highway, a stretch of empty asphalt surrounded by tall evergreen trees, far removed from residential neighborhoods and potential law enforcement surveillance. I parked beneath the dense canopy of pine branches, shielding my vehicle from overhead traffic cameras, and pulled my smartphone out once more to review the hundreds of ledger photographs I'd captured inside Grady's locked office. Each coded entry lined up perfectly with the timeline Jesse had recounted for me back at Marnie's kitchen table. Shipping manifests listed as farm equipment deliveries matched the dates of the prescription drug smuggling runs, wire transfers traced back to shell companies registered out of state, all funneling payments to bank accounts linked directly to Grady Voss and the two other county officials who had orchestrated Eli Brewer's murder 8 years prior. I opened an encrypted anonymous email client installed on my phone months earlier for library cybersecurity training exercises, attached every high-resolution photograph to the draft message, and addressed the correspondence to the Ohio State Police's criminal investigation tip line. I added a brief typed summary outlining the conspiracy, naming each corrupt official and detailing the cover-up surrounding Eli's ruled accidental death, then hit the send button without attaching any identifying information or return email address. A quiet weight lifted from my shoulders the moment the delivery confirmation notification popped up across my screen, yet I knew relief could not settle fully into my bones until state investigators arrived to seize the evidence and arrest the men who had terrorized this small county for nearly a decade. I restarted my sedan and turned back toward Marnie's rural country road, my headlights cutting through the gathering twilight as I navigated the winding two-lane pavement. The gravel turnout where I'd left my vehicle that morning sat empty, and my pulse quickened as I spotted a county sheriff's patrol car parked along the shoulder half a mile from Marnie's driveway, its engine idling quietly beneath the bare branches of a maple tree. Deputy Tate leaned against the driver's side door of the cruiser, his arms folded across his uniformed chest, watching every vehicle that passed along the narrow roadway. I kept my speed steady, refusing to alter my driving pattern or make any sudden lane changes that might draw unwanted suspicion, and rolled slowly past his stationary patrol car. His gaze tracked my sedan as I drove onward, his eyes narrowing slightly as he recognized my license plate, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter beneath my palms until his silhouette faded into the rearview mirror. I turned onto Marnie's gravel driveway and parked beside the weathered wooden garage, killing the engine and slipping out of the vehicle as silently as possible. The front porch light remained switched off, a prearranged signal from Marnie that the surrounding road remained clear of immediate surveillance. I tapped 3 short knocks against the screen door, our agreed-upon safe arrival code, and the wooden interior door creaked open to reveal Marnie standing just inside the entryway, her hands twisted nervously in the hem of her flannel apron. "Tate has been patrolling this stretch of road nonstop since you left for town," she whispered, stepping aside to let me cross the threshold into the warm living room. "Jesse has been monitoring every vehicle passing the property line from the attic window, convinced they intend to execute the search warrant the moment full darkness settles over the countryside." I locked the deadbolt behind me and followed her toward the kitchen, where Jesse sat leaning forward across the wooden table, his elbows braced against the grain, his expression tight with anxious anticipation. I pulled my smartphone out and slid the device across the tabletop so he could view the confirmation email proving the ledger evidence had been anonymously submitted to state investigators. Once those detectives begin cross-referencing these financial records with the witness statement we prepare to file, every layer of their carefully constructed cover-up will begin to unravel, Jesse murmured, scrolling slowly through the attached photographic evidence on my phone screen. Grady coded each shipment to avoid direct incrimination, but the repeated out-of-state wire transfers leave an undeniable paper trail linking him to the fentanyl smuggling ring. Marnie set 3 steaming mugs of chamomile tea down upon the table, the warm ceramic releasing a soft floral aroma that cut through the lingering tension thickening the kitchen air. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pushed 1 mug toward each of us, the faint nervous tremor she could never fully conceal whenever fear gnawed at her resolve. "We need to prepare a formal witness account detailing everything you witnessed 8 years ago, Jesse. The state investigators will require a sworn written statement to corroborate the financial evidence we've submitted anonymously." Jesse nodded and reached for a lined spiral notebook resting beside the sugar bowl, his pen hovering above the blank page for a long thoughtful moment before he began scribbling down every detail he could recall from the night he stumbled upon the county smuggling operation. I leaned back in my wooden kitchen chair, sipping the warm herbal tea and listening to the scratch of his pen across the paper, my gaze drifting toward the kitchen window where the last faint streaks of twilight were bleeding from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a lone dog barked from a neighboring farm, the sound echoing across the quiet open field stretching beyond Marnie's property line. We had barely finished drafting the first 2 pages of Jesse's sworn witness statement when a low-distance siren wailed along the county highway, growing steadily louder as multiple emergency vehicles approached the rural roadway. Marnie's mug clattered against the linoleum countertop, the warm tea sloshing slightly over the rim, and Jesse instantly closed the spiral notebook, shoving the written statement into the front pocket of his worn denim jacket. "That cannot be the local sheriff's department responding to the search warrant so quickly," Jesse muttered, crossing the kitchen to peer through the gap between the drawn window curtains. "Multiple sirens mean state police units have been dispatched to this county, responding directly to the anonymous tip we submitted from downtown." I stepped beside him to glance out into the darkened driveway, watching 2 marked state police sedans and an unmarked detective vehicle turn onto the gravel road leading toward Marnie's property. The red and blue emergency lights flashed across the bare maple trees lining the ditch, casting jagged streaks of color across the weathered wooden siding of the farmhouse. No county patrol cars followed close behind. Colton Tate and the local sheriff had been completely bypassed by the State Criminal Investigation Division, stripped of any authority to interfere with the federal-level smuggling probe. Marnie pulled the front door open wide as the lead state police sedan rolled to a stop at the end of the driveway, 2 plainclothes detectives stepping out onto the gravel with official badges clipped to their suit lapels. 1 female detective with short-cropped brown hair approached the porch steps, her expression calm and professional, holding a printed copy of our anonymous evidence submission tucked inside a manila folder. We received your encrypted tip detailing a large-scale prescription drug smuggling ring operating out of this county, alongside witness allegations of a covered-up homicide from 8 years prior, the detective explained, pausing briefly to glance between the three of us standing in the farmhouse entryway. We are prepared to take sworn witness statements and place Mr. Jesse Carter under protective custody to ensure his safety while we execute arrest warrants for Grady Voss, Colton Tate, and the 2 remaining county officials named in your financial evidence. A slow shaky breath escaped Marnie's lips, and she reached out to clasp Jesse's forearm tightly between her palms, the 8 long years of fear and desperate waiting finally beginning to dissolve from her rigid shoulders. For the first time since my unannounced surprise visit had unraveled the town's darkest secret, I watched the tight tension leave her posture, replaced by a quiet weary sense of relief that felt long overdue. Jesse handed over the handwritten sworn witness statement we had drafted inside the kitchen, his steady fingers brushing the detective's folder as he passed the notebook across the porch step. Every detail contained within these pages matches the coded financial transactions captured inside Grady Voss's downtown hardware store office this afternoon. I witnessed the smuggling operation firsthand in 2018, and was forced into 8 years of fugitive exile after witnessing the fatal shooting of Eli Brewer to cover up the criminal enterprise. The detective nodded and gestured toward the unmarked state police vehicle parked at the edge of the driveway. You will be transported to a secure protective custody facility 2 counties away to await the formal grand jury indictment hearing scheduled for the following month. Your mother and your niece will remain available as material witnesses, and we will assign a round-the-clock state police security detail to guard this residence until all defendants have been formally taken into custody. Jesse pulled Marnie into a gentle lingering embrace, his forehead resting lightly against hers, no hurried whispered words needed between them to communicate the flood of emotion swirling beneath their quiet interaction. He turned to offer me a grateful half-smile, the faint scar above his eyebrow catching the glow of the porch security light as he extended one hand to shake mine. I never imagined I would return to this town and find someone willing to stand beside me to fight for long overdue justice, he said quietly. Without your courage to sneak into Voss's office and secure the critical financial evidence we required to dismantle their corrupt operation, Eli's murder would have remained buried beneath small-town lies forever. I squeezed his hand gently, shaking my head to dismiss his gratitude. You had already spent 8 lonely years gathering every loose thread of this conspiracy. I only held the final piece of the puzzle up to the light so the rest of the world could finally see the truth hidden beneath this county's quiet peaceful facade. He climbed into the back seat of the unmarked state police vehicle, and the detective closed the car door firmly behind him. The fleet of law enforcement vehicles pulled away from Marnie's driveway, their flashing emergency lights fading back toward the downtown square where Grady Voss and Colton Tate would soon be arrested on federal conspiracy, drug trafficking, and accessory to murder charges. Marnie leaned against the wooden porch railing, watching the distant glow of the police lights vanish beyond the tree line, a quiet tear sliding down her cheek before she brushed it away with the back of her hand. We spent the remainder of the evening sitting side by side on the faded floral living room couch, sipping reheated chamomile tea and listening to the soft rustle of wine through the maple branches outside the window. We did not rush to fill the silence with unnecessary conversation, both of us processing the overwhelming sequence of events that had unfolded since I had pulled into this rural driveway earlier that morning with nothing more than a birthday pecan pie and a harmless impulse to surprise my aunt. By the time the first pale streaks of dawn stretched across the eastern horizon, a uniformed state police security officer arrived to post a permanent guard detail at the end of Marnie's gravel driveway, tasked with monitoring every vehicle and pedestrian traveling along the country roadway to eliminate any remaining risk of retaliation from the criminal defendants now awaiting formal arraignment in county lockup. In the weeks that followed, every layer of the small-town corruption unraveled in open court hearings broadcast across local regional news outlets. Grady Voss's carefully curated public reputation as a generous community volunteer crumbled beneath the weight of ledger evidence and sworn witness testimony, alongside Colton Tate's decades-long law enforcement career and the political careers of the 2 county commissioners who had accepted bribes to shield the smuggling ring from outside scrutiny. Each defendant entered formal guilty pleas to avoid lengthy jury trials, accepting decades-long federal prison sentences for their roles in the drug trafficking conspiracy and the deliberate cover-up of Eli Brewer's wrongful death. On the first Sunday following the final round of sentencing hearings, Marnie and I attended the morning worship service at the small community church on the edge of town. The wooden pews felt quieter than usual, several familiar faces absent from the congregation now that the corrupt local officials had been removed from positions of power within the county. We sat toward the back of the sanctuary, listening to the soft strum of the church piano accompanying a familiar gospel hymn, and I glanced over to watch Marnie bow her head in quiet whispered prayer, her fingers folded loosely in her lap. After the service concluded, we walked slowly back to Marnie's parked sedan beneath a pale overcast November sky, stopping briefly to pause beside Eli Brewer's weathered granite headstone in the small cemetery adjacent to the church grounds. I laid a single small bouquet of dried maple leaves against the base of his grave marker, a quiet tribute to the retired veteran whose unspoken murder had remained hidden for 8 long years beneath this town's carefully maintained illusion of peace and decency. Justice does not always arrive quickly, Marnie said softly, her breath fogging faintly in the cool autumn air. Sometimes it requires ordinary people to step outside the safety of quiet conformity, to risk everything to pull the truth out from beneath layers of fear and silence. I nodded, staring out across the rolling farmland stretching beyond the cemetery fence, thinking of Jesse waiting in protective custody for his formal exoneration hearing, of the countless small-town residents who had spent years looking away from corruption to preserve their own sense of security and belonging. We would never erase every scar left behind by the years of lies and fear, nor would we restore the peaceful innocence this county had once held before greed and corruption took root within its most respected circles. Some fragments of what had been broken would never fully mend, a bittersweet reminder that redemption rarely arrives as a perfect fairy tale ending. We climbed back into the sedan and pulled away from the cemetery parking lot, heading toward Marnie's quiet rural farmhouse as the weak afternoon sunlight filtered through the bare branches of the maple trees lining the country roadway. Somewhere far down the winding 2-lane highway, a new chapter was beginning for every person tied to this long-buried secret. For the wrongfully accused fugitive finally cleared of fabricated criminal charges, for the grieving mother who had spent 8 years protecting her son from corrupt authority, for the quiet small-town girl who had stumbled into a hidden conspiracy and chosen courage over complacency when the moment demanded it most. The screen door of Marnie's farmhouse would still screech when pulled open against the wind, the third wooden step on the front porch would continue to creak beneath every set of footsteps that crossed its weathered surface, and the faint bitter scent of burnt coffee would occasionally linger in the kitchen air on quiet lonely evenings. These small familiar markers would forever anchor the memory of the afternoon I arrived unannounced with a birthday pie, the afternoon a terrified aunt had pulled me into hiding and whispered a desperate plea to shield me from the dangerous truth buried within our own hometown. I rested my elbow against the car window as we drove along the familiar country road, watching the golden late autumn sunlight spill across the dormant cornfields, and allowed myself to settle into the quiet fragile peace that had finally returned to this corner of rural Ohio. We had not fixed every wound the town had endured, nor could we erase every choice made out of fear and greed, but we had given the voiceless their long-awaited chance to be heard. And sometimes, that quiet hard-won gift of truth was more than enough to begin healing all the broken things left behind in its wake.